Hello, everybody. It's Codurance and AWS here for our Crafting the Cloud, Aligning Migration and Application Modernisation with AWS event. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. First of all, we just want to run through a few bits of housekeeping as we kick off our event today. So, Rodrigo, can we share the slides? Great.
There we go.
So the next slide. Great. So just a little bit of housekeeping to kick us off. We are live on this webinar until 2:15 today. So we are going to be recording. So we'll be sharing the recording and the slides after the event. If you've got any questions, then we have a question tab. You'll see that down, I think it's down in the right-hand side for you. So please do post any questions and we'll save those up to the end and get through as many as we can at the end. If you have anything you want to say, you want to chat about anything, then please use the chat feature. And yeah, hope you have a really great time today. The agenda is going to be Codurance talking about our experiences with cloud modernisation. And then we'll have our friends from AWS talking about that kind of the AWS flavour on that. And then, as I say, at the end, we'll have the Q&A. And if anyone wants to follow at Codurance, then please feel free to do so. So just a few quick introductions. I'm Natalie Gray. I'm the Head of Marketing and Partnerships at Codurance. And Matt?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Matt Belcher. I'm a Principal Software Craftsperson with Codurance.
And Rodrigo?
Good afternoon. I'm Rodrigo Nascimento. I'm the Head of Platform Engineering for Codurance.
And Sam?
Hi everyone. I'm a Principal Platform Engineer for Codurance.
And Junaid?
Hi, I'm Junaid. I'm a Specialist Solutions Architect, and my speciality is to help customers migrate and modernize their workloads into AWS.
Fantastic. And finally, Kishan.
Hey everyone, my name is Kishan Dave. I'm the same team as Junaid, working with customers who are adopting cloud and also helping them modernize on cloud.
Amazing. So just a very quick overview about who Codurance is, if you've not come across us before. We're a global software consultancy helping customers migrate and modernize to the cloud, so helping them sort of build net new cloud native applications or modernizing their existing applications and platforms to drive value in their organizations, from sort of startups to large global enterprises. We also, next slide. We have around 7 offices in Europe, so in the UK and Spain. We've been in business for 10 years. So it'll be our 10th birthday in October. So look out for some celebrations of our birthday later on in the year. We're around about 250 employees, and we also manage a community of about 10,000 software engineers who are passionate about software craftsmanship. So lots of great events and communities to join if you're interested. In terms of our partnership with AWS, we're an advanced services tier partner. We are also a well-architected partner. We have the Lambda service delivery competency, and we can help our customers access amazing support and funding through our partnership with AWS. And so do get in touch if any of that is of interest. So just kind of handing over now to my colleague, Matt, who's going to kick us off with the problem we're discussing today. Over to you, Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I think just to sort of kick things off, we have a very quick poll just to sort of see where you all are on your cloud journey. So on the bottom right-hand side, there should be a little poll that you can see. Whilst you're doing that, I'll make a start. I'm going to come back to that in a second. So let's jump into it. Why are we here talking about crafting the cloud? What do we mean by that? And why is that important? So to set some context a little bit, let's start by taking a brief look at the current state of software development and cloud adoption as a whole. So if we jump to the next slide, please. So whether we like it or not, change is inevitable. If we look back at where we are today versus a few years ago, the world's in quite a different place. The COVID-19 crisis has changed much of how we live our lives today, and more so than ever, customers are turning to technology for solutions. People are now, for example, buying cars online, people are having GP checkups online. These things weren't really happening, if at all, very much before COVID. So COVID-19 is a stark reminder, really, that change is inevitable and unavoidable. And whether we like it or not, the software systems that we're building, they're going to have change thrust upon them at some point in time. And this change could be through changes in tech landscape, business models, customer expectations, or of course, more recently, even the economy. But even aside from COVID-19, of course, most recently, we're seeing AI become more accessible. Many organizations are starting to kind of have a look at what impact AI might have on their business and what changes that might bring. So whether we like it or not, change is coming and we have to be prepared for that. Also, we see lots of customers still failing to really see the value from being in the cloud. Cloud computing's been around for quite some time now. However, according to a recent study, just over half of those companies that have adopted the cloud are really seeing the benefits of being in the cloud. They're just not seeing the benefits that they had hoped to see around reduction in costs, for example, or being able to drive new revenue streams. Next slide, please. And finally, many organizations are not able to focus their efforts on the right things. So rather than investing the bulk of their time and resources on innovation and real kind of value-adding activities, they're sort of stuck spinning the wheels. So large amounts of effort and time are spent more towards kind of maintenance and support, all around sort of the BAU process for the organization. That plus the cognitive load placed on many engineering teams is just so great and so high that there's not really any bandwidth for them to be able to explore improvements to their ways of working or even experimenting with new things and new ways of working. Next slide, please. So that very brief, quick snapshot tells us that there's some problems right now in kind of cloud adoption and kind of how people are using the cloud. Companies need to be ready for change, and if they're not prepared for change, they eventually will end up losing market share, and they'll be overtaken by those companies that are best set up to be able to adapt quickly to change. One good example of this that you might know and might remember is Nokia. So for quite some time, Nokia were dominating the mobile phone market all the way through the 90s up until around 2007. And that was the year that Steve Jobs announced the iPhone. And that triggered Nokia's market share to then tumble from about 49% to about 3% by 2013. And many people claimed that one of the main reasons for that was because Nokia had neglected the software side of things. They had put lots of heavy investment into the hardware, but actually the software was struggling to keep up. And so Apple came along and really sort of changed the game in that respect. So Nokia weren't really prepared for the change. So that's kind of an example of kind of what can happen if you're not prepared for change. So cloud computing promises so much, and yet still so many are yet to really see the full benefits of adopting the cloud and what that can bring. Many organizations, as we just said, just don't have the bandwidth yet to be able to explore innovation and tap into new markets and solve problems in new and perhaps more efficient ways.
Cheers, Matt. So as Matt was discussing, we've seen as Codurance that there's quite a few issues with cloud adoption. The cloud, let's think about AWS, has been around coming up to about 20 years now. Like, you feel like we probably should have figured out how to run systems well in the cloud, and we see a lot of organizations that unfortunately aren't there. So there must be a reason why we've got to this situation. One of the things that we as Codurance see is potentially some issues with agile adoption. So if we go to the next slide, we'll discuss a little bit more about that, please, Rodrigo. So 2001, so only 5 years before the cloud came around, we heard this term agile. I'm sure everyone on this call has probably heard lots and lots about agile and how to do it and how not to do it. What we see as Codurance is that actually agile was really focused on the process side of things. So I wonder how many people in this call have had daily stand-ups or have done sprint demos and sprint retros. It's very process focused. Maybe it's talking about how we build teams or how we actually manage work through these controlled processes. There's been dozens and dozens of agile frameworks that have come out, and there's very prescriptive guidance on how to do agile. And what we see as Codurance is that the actual essence of agile has kind of been lost a little bit through all that. So Codurance as a company was actually founded on the idea of software craftsmanship, which kind of embellishes agile in a way. So if we move to the next slide, please, we got Rodrigo. We can discuss a little bit about what software craftsmanship is. So software craftsmanship is really looking to address the balance or readdress the balance from agile and look at technical practices, not just the processes. So the software craftsmanship manifesto is up on your screen here. So what we're not saying is that agile is bad at all. Agile is brilliant, and it brought around lots and lots of improved ways of working. Companies have managed to deliver their software quicker. But what we see from a well-crafted perspective is that actually we can improve on agile, or we can evolve agile by focusing more on how we develop good quality software. So we have not only working software, but also well-crafted software. And what we're going to do during this talk is actually see how can we apply the principles of software craftsmanship and apply them to the cloud. I think that's it for this one. So in the next few slides, Matt's going to discuss a little bit more and go into a bit more detail about each line of that manifesto.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So as Sam was saying there, the name suggests the Software Craftsmanship Manifesto is only really geared towards software. But as Codurance, we've been trying to stretch that a little bit further. And so this idea of not just well-crafted software, but well-crafted platforms. So what does that really mean in practice? So for us, this generally kind of boils down to three key things, really, all of which that we find aligns quite well with the AWS well-architected framework and the pillars that are composed of that. So, for example, we take the practices around modularization and domain-driven design, and we apply them to how we structure our AWS cloud platforms. Often, for example, we'll work with clients that they've made some attempts at how they might structure their software using these techniques, domain-driven design, and finding bounded context aligned to the organization. But then we'll have a look at their AWS account structure, and it doesn't really match that structure at all, and if anything. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the software structure and the AWS account structure. So what we try to do is we try to apply the same techniques across both AWS cloud and infrastructure as we do to our software. And so by aligning our software together with our AWS cloud infrastructure, what we can do then is some quite nice things. So we can start to align, for example, the workloads of our AWS account to internal cost centers. And that enables us to do things like enable visibility of costs on the cloud at a much finer grained level. So we can do things like monitoring of our investments to then kind of help drive decisions around where best to make future investments based on actual data. And we can take the data from our AWS resources and look at those in AWS tooling, such as OpenSearch and things like that, to be able to sort of create dashboards that then the business people can see actually kind of how much money are we spending on the resources and what's the ROI on our investments. And we found that this actually kind of, again, aligns quite well to the idea of cost optimization, which is another part of the AWS re-architected framework. So by structuring the software and our cloud platform and resources using those techniques around end-to-end design, but then sort of taking that a step further and sort of breaking down monolithic structures and components into smaller independent microservices by using AWS services like AWS Lambda or EKS. We're also then able to make our architectures more robust and more scalable. And so there are also some of the things that I'll discuss, for example, in the AWS reliability pillar, around how best to design your workloads in that way. And then finally, we believe in embracing a culture of automation right the way throughout the software development lifecycle. So automating not just how software is deployed, but also how we define and provision and build infrastructure and resources as well. So by leveraging tools such as CloudFormation or AWS Code Pipeline enables us to do these things. And this enables organizations then to have a repeatable and reliable change management process, which is something that is part of the operational excellence pillar within the AWS re-architected framework. If we go to the next slide, please. So ideally, we want to be able to make changes quickly and easy, not only to our software, but to, as I was saying, to our cloud resources as well. And so the best way of trying to do that really is to favor longer-lived product teams over sort of transient project teams. And these product teams eventually over time can become experts in a particular area, able to constantly hone and improve their individual part of the platform. If you've seen the book Team Topologies, for example, that talks about a number of different models for teams and interactions. I'll just quickly call out two here that are important. The first one is the idea of a stream-aligned teams. So once we have our cloud platform structured well, aligned to business streams, it opens up the idea of having teams modeled around these business streams. So for example, in the past, you might have seen a database team or a front-end team and a back-end team. I think what we're proposing here is teams that are more aligned towards business streams. So you might have an order team, a logistics team, a product team, and so forth. And the second team model is the idea of a platform team. So we've seen many of our clients have quite a lot of success in adopting this way of working, treating their AWS cloud platform as a product, and having a team around that. And then the stakeholders being the internal different engineering teams that have requirements on how they need to use the AWS platform. And this platform team can also take on some common tasks around ensuring there's a standard way for logging, for handling secrets, and so on and so forth. So again, taking some of the load off the engineering teams. Next slide, please. We also look to try to establish a community of professionals when we work with our clients. And typically, a major part of this is trying to establish a centre of excellence. It tends to be a collection of individuals that come together to drive out best practices and generally sort of provide leadership around how the cloud platform should be built within the organisation and to ensure a degree of standardisation across the whole organisation. And generally, they're sort of creating guidance and documentation around this, and also facilitating sort of general knowledge sharing about how the cloud platform should be used across different teams in the organisation. Next slide, please. And finally, sort of designing and building software products, as we all know, is a team game, and so it needs involvement from lots of different stakeholders in a timely manner. This is particularly important when we're talking about cloud modernisation as well. We need to be involving the right people early on to enable us to better align technology to the business. I think quite often we see clients that, for example, they'll try to bolt on security concerns as an afterthought, which is then a much more harder thing to do, rather than kicking off modernisation pieces of work starting with early involvement from security parts of the business.
Cheers, Matt. So we've got a problem, and we've got software craftsmanship and how we can apply that to cloud modernization. So what we can do is bring these two things together, and as Codurance, we've developed this cloud modernization framework, which we believe will help customers go from a relatively immature cloud operating model, for example, and take them right through to the right-hand side, where they're innovating quickly, they're able to make very lots and lots of small bets and lots of experiments, and really sort of develop their product in a sustainable and fast way. So just what we're going to do is just go through each one of these stages that we've identified and just discuss a little bit about those stages. So if we think on the left-hand side, as I said, where some companies may not be in the cloud, they may just be starting out in the cloud, or they might be moving from one cloud to another. What we would aim to do in this first section is actually start to realize some of the kind of like the key benefits of the cloud straight away. So let's just pick a couple out. We might want to, using cloud providers like AWS, we can actually transfer that infrastructure ownership and let AWS take care of what they're good at, and then we can not have to worry about the hardware and the data centers and the security of physical assets, and just build platforms in the cloud and take on the ownership of building things that make sense, that give business value. Just picking out one more thing, so we can actually start building platforms in the cloud in an automated way. So we can use tools like infrastructure as code, using things like Terraform or CloudFormation, and ensure that the platforms that we run in the cloud are fully visible right from the outset. What that means is that we can start to track costs, we can start to gain lots and lots of data to help us throughout this sort of cloud modernization journey. The idea for each one of these four sections is that we generate data for the next section. So if we start moving on to optimize, where we've started collecting some metrics, we can actually then start to instrument some of our applications and platforms and really build a highly observable platform out of that. So using tools such as OpenSearch or even just CloudWatch metrics, we can start to kind of really get a good, really good visibility of what's going on, not just from the user perspective, but also from the technical and the business perspective. We can also start to put in more change controls and governance. Maybe there's service control policies that we can add. Maybe there's activating security hub, and using all these sorts of tools that can help us in the cloud to gain that visibility and actually make sure that when we do deploy changes, we know what's going to happen before they're actually deployed. So these two, set up and migrate or optimize, are really kind of focus on the platform level. And the idea here is that we need to get the basics right before we then move on to more modernization work, collect that data, and then we can start to look at the software. And so Matt's going to sort of discuss the next two stages with that sort of focus.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So based on those first two stages of the journey, we've now got hopefully a wealth of data and insights in terms of how our platform's being used, how our products being used by our customers. And all that information and all those insights then help us in terms of what a modernization effort needs to look like. Where should we be investing our efforts? How might we need to evolve our architecture to enable it to better meet the business needs? So one of the main areas of this kind of modernize phase is really kind of trying to ensure that we have a better alignment between technical architecture and those business needs. Because really we want the technology to be an enabler for the business in effect. But this is only really possible when there's that strong alignment between technology and business goals. So this kind of starts really by trying to evolve the application architecture. So it's the first time we're really sort of getting into the realms of changing the system in terms of architecture. But looking to evolve that now, sort of, so that we are able to best align to the business. So typically, for example, we work with customers at this stage, perhaps to move away from a monolithic application to perhaps microservices, often sort of powered by AWS Lambda, for example. So moving away from monolith to more kind of microservices design. And this then kind of this breaking down of the monolith enables them to target independent capabilities kind of on the per use case rather than kind of a blanket one size fits all. So for example, if there's specific requirements around scalability around a particular part of your system, you can target those specifically and cater for those rather than having to do a blanket approach for the entire monolith. So the first part of this talk we mentioned also that change being unavoidable. So this modernization phase really is trying to evolve our technical architecture in such a way that it embraces the fact that change is going to happen, and we're best set up to be able to cater and adapt quickly to that change. So in effect, trying to sort of make it easier, but also less riskier for us to make changes as and when we need to make them. And then the fourth stage is kind of more of an ongoing stage, really, kind of a continual improvement stage that we call innovate. And at this stage, we're kind of in the territory of trying to continuously develop our software and our product with ease. So for us at Codurance, a big part of that is experimentation. So making it very easy and cheap to be able to experiment with new ideas, new products, new technologies, and so on. There's a wealth of AWS services that are available now. It's kind of lowering the bar to be able to use those services in your architecture. So moving towards a more modular architecture enables you to switch out different implementations of different things. Maybe, for example, you want to try some of the AWS AI services or AI tooling for some part of your architecture. Having got into a position where your architecture is now more modular, that becomes a much more easier thing to do. And by building on those previous work around operating safely and securely in the cloud, we're able to carry out these experimentations much more cheaply. But also we're able to get the feedback that's important from doing the experiments. So we're able to tell very quickly whether the experiment's working and kind of worth pursuing, or whether we should try something else. So very, very briefly, our cloud modernization framework, as you saw it there, is really sort of designed to do two things, really. One, obviously reduce the total cost of ownership across those four phases gradually over time. So you're spending less time on kind of maintenance and support. And as a result of that, freeing up more time to focus on business value and ultimately being able to unlock innovation towards that very end. Next slide, please. So myself, Sam, and Rodrigo, we have this term that we use, the lift and shift hangover. Often we see organizations that sometimes see going to the cloud as being the silver bullet for them, that it's going to solve all of their problems. We often ask our clients, why do you want to go to the cloud? What's the driver for you? What's the business reason for you moving to the cloud? And often we'll hear things such as, I want to release my software faster, or I want to be able to change my software more easily. I want my software to be more robust. And they're all noble goals, of course. The trouble is these things don't come for free. And just by being in the cloud doesn't magically give you these things. There's some work still to do. And so many organizations, they have that initial plan to move to the cloud. They never really get past that initial kind of lift and shift migration. They don't end up kind of evolving their plan once they get there, and instead kind of fall back into the same ways of working that they had before, and now they're using cloud computing rather than on-premise. So they soon get frustrated because they aren't able to see the benefits that they had hoped to see or that they were promised they would get. And so we term this to sort of the lift and shift hangover, and it's a little bit like going out for a few drinks with your friends on a kind of Friday night. It's all feels great fun. You're moving to the cloud. You're thinking you're moving in the right direction. It's all going to be great, and then you wake up a little while later with a bit of a sore head. Many organizations they jump to the cloud for a while. That did feel really good for them, but then they realized that they still had software that was hard to change and difficult to scale. Still long lead times to change. and the cost savings that they had hoped to achieve hadn't really materialised. So we had a client, for example, that had a very tight deadline to move to the cloud before they lost their on-premise site. And so their main focus was purely, let's get to the cloud, let's change our underlying compute. However, once that had been achieved, though, we worked with them to think about what the next stage of that would be, what was the next step on their cloud modernization journey, so that they were able to then kind of better leverage the underlying cloud platform.
Cool, cheers, Matt. So how do we avoid it? How do we actually make sure that we don't fall into this lift and shift hangover? There's a few things that we can consider. As Codurance, what we really believe in is this notion of iterating and just deliver what's necessary right now. So what we can, bringing that right back to the beginning, what we don't want to do is produce a strategic plan that is hundreds and hundreds of pages long. Because one, it'll take forever to do. We'll have to write loads and loads of text. Two, it's probably never going to be reviewed by anyone. And then three, it's not open to that change. And if we just focus on delivering to this specific strategic plan over, say, 1, 2, 5 years, we could be 1 or 2 or 5 years behind the industry by the time we've actually delivered that plan. So what we see is that we develop this what's termed as an emergent strategy. As you can see, there's a nice quote from Henry Berg on the screen there. But really, what this is about is defining a strategy, planning it, using things like discovery workshops, which we find really, really benefit our customers, developing a strategy, and then continually refining it, continually looking back and seeing, are we actually delivering the right thing? In AWS land, one of the tools we can use is the well-architected framework to help us to do that. I don't know how many people have come across this on the call, but the well-architected framework is really, really good, and you should definitely take a look at the white papers, look at how it can be applied to your own cloud platforms. It's very, very comprehensive, so it gives you lots and lots of guidance, and it's focused on 6 pillars. So we've got cost optimization, reliability, performance, efficiency, security, sustainability, and operational excellence, I think it is. I got a thumbs up from Natalie there. So yeah, go take a look. It's really, really good. Just moving on to the next slide. I'm aware we've got lots of great content from the AWS team as well, so I'm gonna have to skip through these a little bit. But looking at how we define the strategy, what we try and do at Codurance is align these to the assess, the mobilize, the migrate, and modernize phases from AWS. So these are really quite nicely aligned when we're not just migrating to the cloud, but also modernizing within the cloud. So for example, we take a look at what is the current state of things, essentially. That's the assess phase. Then we start to plan and say, right, how are we actually going to achieve cloud modernization? Where are we actually going to land on the cloud modernization framework that we were speaking about? And then after that, how do we continually iterate and improve and modernize to really try and get us to that right-hand side of continual innovation? If we just move to the next slide, please. Cheers, Rodrigo. Okay, so we lead some discovery workshops, for example, with our customers using a well-architected framework to guide us. We can then take away the outputs from those workshops and feed them into 2 key sort of artifacts. So we've got the business case, so the why are we doing this, and then forming the strategic plan for how we're actually going to achieve what we want to achieve as a business. So you can kind of see on the left-hand side, we've got the what, look at the current state of things, business case is the why, and the strategic plan is the how. In the next couple of slides, I think there's just some of the ingredients that go into the business case and the strategic plan. So on here, we can kind of see there are some quite nice parallels as well here with the well-architected framework. So financials, how are we actually going to how are we going to measure the benefits from a financial perspective of moving to the cloud? What do we expect to see? How can we address potentially some of our security and governance holes that we don't have at the minute? Can we automate as much as possible using some of these AWS tools like Security Hub and AWS Config and things like that? I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just sort of gives you a little flavour of what are the ingredients for the business case. Excuse me. And finally, we've got the a few things that we want to make sure are absolutely included in our version 1 of the strategic plan. So we want to have things like, what are the business objectives? What business reason do we have for modernisation? All the way through to whether we actually need to change the entire organisation, how we structure our teams, and how we obtain the right skills and governance and responsibilities and things like that. So these are some of the, feel free to get in touch if you want any more detail on these. I'm aware I'm skipping through a little bit, but I think we're running a little short on time. So I think we can just move to the last slide. So just to wrap up then from Codurance, we kind of discussed a little bit about software craftsmanship. We talked about how there really are some issues with organisations in their cloud adoption right now, and how we can really invest in that quality to reduce the cost of change from a craftsmanship perspective. We talked about the lift and shift hangover and how we don't want to end up in that situation where we've got to the cloud and we're like, what the hell's going on? Why are we spending so much? And really using those data-driven decisions to guide us along that cloud modernisation journey. Following that, we really need to kind of develop a lightweight and emergent strategy to make sure that we can continually iterate, reflect, and plan for future changes. So it's really about making that cost of change as small as possible, so that it can be as flexible as possible for cloud modernisation. I think that's everything from Codurance's side. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over to, I think it's Junaid next, who's going to discuss a little bit about how AWS apply their own principles to migration and modernisation.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So myself and Kishan, being migration and modernization specialist solutions architect at AWS, are going to be talking about exactly that, and just elaborate further from what Matt and Sam were talking about. So the topics under discussion today, we're going to be talking about what benefits organizations are actually seeing from migration and modernization. Also, we'll talk about some of the strategies that their customers and organizations are adapting in order to migrate and modernize into the cloud. Number 3, we'll be talking about the cloud adoption journey and the typical cloud adoption journey that AWS actually sees from time to time. Fourthly, we'll talk about the migration and modernization acceleration steps, similar to what Matt and Sam have already touched upon, the assess, mobilize, and then migrating and modernizing and then innovating. Just going a little bit deeper into explaining those processes and how that works at AWS. Finally, we'll be wrapping up with introducing you to some of the tools and programs for migration and modernization that AWS has to offer. So let's move on. Okay, so recent study actually has it that 50%, approximately 50% of enterprise workloads and data are in the public cloud. So why are all these organizations actually moving to the cloud, and what benefits are they seeing? So what we do see, the reasons and priorities for different organizations are different, but the effective goals and objectives are the same. And some of those goals and objectives are that they want to actually accelerate business transformation, meaning if they're not, they don't have a digital presence, they want to move their sort of legacy sort of business. For example, a retailer who's actually selling in store, or a startup who doesn't have any digital presence wants to have an e-commerce presence. They want to move their workloads into sort of that digital transformation. The cloud actually helps you accelerate. Secondly, we see that customers see the ability to be more agile and innovate quickly. By that, they're not tied into having to rely on scaling up their data centers or on-premise servers or resources and memory and CPU and IT stuff and all that stuff. A click of a button in the cloud, they can actually scale up their resources. They sort of can move at pace and focus on the new features that they want to actually deliver to the customer and meet those market demands and stay in competition. Thirdly, reduce operating costs. Being in the cloud sort of significantly reduces some of those operating costs. Having your own data center, staff to manage it, the resources, overheads, electricity, servers, all that stuff actually adds to costs. And instead of having those capital upfront expenses, you sort of move to a more sort of variable expense model, where in the cloud you're only paying for what you use and the resources that you use, and we see a great benefit on that one. Number 4, the ability to be scale and be performant in the cloud. Obviously, if you have a business and you're seeing a lot of traffic to your workloads or your systems, then in the cloud, a click of a button or having some sort of auto scaling mechanism, you can actually scale up your resources and ensure that your customers aren't getting that degraded performance that they're actually seeing, and gives a more rich customer experience. And this is a key benefit. Finally, but most importantly, at least from AWS's point of view, it improves security and compliance, and this is what a lot of customers see benefit from. AWS, AWS, basically there's a shared security responsibility where AWS is responsible for of the cloud, whereas the customers and businesses are responsible for workloads that they actually run in the cloud. So, different organizations, as Matt and Sam actually pointed out, are in different phases of their journey. Some are actually tied into legacy on-premise data centers, and are on a different journey and have different reasons and priorities to actually move forward. For those customers, they may choose to sort of, for certain reasons, they may not choose to move some of their workloads due to compliance reasons. It has to be on premise, whereas some customers may choose to iteratively move some of those workloads over to the cloud and to start benefiting from the cloud as well. And if you can just click on the next animation, Rodrigo. And as you evolve further, not to the next slide. Sorry, there was an animation. So as you move forward into the more modernizing phase on the right-hand side, from legacy to modernization, this is where you start not just moving your workloads to cloud, but also then evolving those workloads and benefiting from some of the more modern ways of working, such as refactoring your workloads or replatforming your workloads and various other things, which we'll actually go into a bit more detail in a bit. So next slide, Rodrigo. So just elaborating on some of the benefits that we spoke about in the previous slide, just like to share some statistics with you from an AWS point of view. Some of the biggest savings that biggest benefits that we see are these 4, where businesses across thousands of migrations are seeing an average of 31% savings in their infrastructure costs. Now, naturally, obviously, if you're not going to be owning a data center, or you're slowly moving workloads off your data center, no longer having to manage those servers, patching those servers, having the staff and overheads to do that, then naturally that cost will go down. And this is what we see in the more clouds, or at least in AWS. Most of our services are on a pay-as-you-go model, where you only pay for the services and compute resources that you use. Secondly, we see fewer security incidents per year. As I mentioned earlier, there's a shared responsibility model at AWS when it comes to security, where AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, such as the infrastructure, the compute, the storage, the networking, all that hardware, the data centers, our availability zones, all that hardware and compute and network and storage resources are being sort of guarded by AWS and protected by AWS. Whereas yes, there is an onus on the customer to protect and secure their workloads that they run in the cloud, their applications, their data. However, AWS does give you the tools and services to secure your workloads. So in a traditional data center, you'd be doing all of that. You'd be, securing your data centers and servers and all the networking and storage and all that stuff you'll be doing, including your applications and your data and everything. Whereas in AWS, you sort of have that shared security model, where we take a lot of responsibility off you. And then this is where, some of the benefits of security come in. The biggest benefit that we've seen is that there's a boost in IT staff in terms of their productivity. 62%, this according to this survey. Naturally, obviously, if your data center staff or people who are actually patching up your servers and running security updates and backups and replications and doing all that stuff manually, or it slowly starts to go away as you move into the cloud and modernize into the cloud. where those staff can then focus on being more innovative and focusing on things which matter to the business most, and working on the next big feature release, and pushing their resources to something more productive. And finally, least but not least, there's many other benefits as well, but we see that customers actually do more feature releases per year. Once you become more cloud native, you'll sort of be in a more sort of what we call a DevOps environment, where you can be more agile and actually deliver your features at a click of a button. For example, if your next feature release or your next product required you to provision hundreds of servers in a traditional data center, you'd be doing that by ordering new servers in, getting those set up, getting those patched up, licensed, and all that stuff. That would take time, right? And in a cloud environment, you can do that within a matter of minutes, and spin up those servers and be ready for your staging, development, and sort of production environments. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide effectively talks about the different strategies and adoption to the cloud that customers actually take, and their benefits. So we call this 7 R's of migration and modernization. So if you look on the left, as you go down this scale, the migration complexity actually goes higher. But what you do, even though the migration complexity and time and cost actually goes higher, the cost to operate and becoming more agile and being able to deliver fast becomes better. So you're sort of, so just to explain some of these terms, retire, you may choose to, a customer who's looking at their workloads or systems may choose to sort of retire certain systems or workloads that are no longer required. Fine, they can decommission those. There's no effort involved in that. Retain, basically, they want to retain their workloads in their current infrastructure. As mentioned earlier, for compliance reasons, they need to have it on their data center. They can't move it for whatever reason. There's no time to move it across, and effectively the cost to operate remains significantly higher. But they don't actually get the agility. Time to market actually becomes higher as well. Relocate, they might want to move to a different platform such as VMware or something like that. They start to get some benefits from being agile, and the cost to operate still remains higher because they're still having to patch up those VMware software, have the licenses running through, and various other things. The cost to migrate and time remains pretty much minimal. Rehost, this is where people start lifting and shifting and moving to the cloud and taking the benefits of the cloud. Again, the time to do a lift and shift and cost to migrate is minimal, but then you start realizing the benefits of some of the things that the customers actually have noticed, which we've discussed earlier. So cost to operate, you don't no longer have your own data centers or servers to manage or patching, and you become more agile. You can actually click a button, actually provision more servers or resources. Repurchase is basically you may want to go to a more SaaS solution, software as a service solution, where cost to migrate and time might be significantly higher, but you start to become more agile. And you can see the pattern as you re-platform or start going to containers or becoming more serverless, or even refactor, then you're starting to benefit from more of the sort of cloud native modernizing practices. So so if you were to refactor a monolith application and go to more sort of serverless workloads such as Lambda and DynamoDB and various other things that we offer AWS, then you start leveraging the true benefits of being agile. Yes, the cost to migrate and time to migrate is higher, but the cost to operate goes down significantly. So yes, there's an initial uplift of cost and time, but you reap the benefits of that later on. Okay, moving to the next slide. So I'd like to discuss the 3 operating models that businesses normally see, and how it helps them based on the previous slide. So you have your traditional operations model, and customers who want to sort of just want to sort of minimize risk and simply want to do a lift and shift of their systems on premise and want to just sustain those and keep them running. They normally rehost and do a lift and shift, but they're still running in a traditional operating model where your deployments and your application engineering and various other things are still being run in a sort of standard operating model. You're still having to patch your servers, your databases need to be backed up, and various other things. But for those customers who want to take who want workloads that are a bit more agile and can change more frequently and need to do frequent deployments and frequent feature releases, they start to move to the optimize phase, where they start to think about replatforming or repurchasing. This is where not only do they move to the cloud. Not only are they doing moving their workloads to the cloud, but actually thinking about replatforming. For example, they might want to replatform their Windows servers to the cloud, but more in a more open source sort of operating system such as Unix, or move to their databases, traditional databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, to an Aurora MySQL or Aurora PostgreSQL instance in AWS, which means that they're no longer having to patch those databases, look after those databases, or backup or do replicas and various other things. Those mundane tasks actually go away when they're starting to use cloud native services. And then those organizations who want to go the step further, which is costly to go to that phase, but that's when they reap the most of the benefits by moving to the cloud, when they go to what we call a DevOps model. So the previous model was cloud ops. They're still having to do the operations on the cloud, where they're still patching the servers, keeping their licenses updated, and various other things for certain workloads that they have. But in a DevOps model, you're sort of completely moving, you're refactoring your workloads, you're moving to serverless, you might be moving your monolith application and re-architecting it into microservices. And this is where you can automate your application engineering and alongside with your operations, and have a more DevOps model where your cloud platforms engineering can be very small, and you can sort of benefit from the continuous integration, continuous deployments, and do more frequent releases and meet those market demands and keep up with competition. Next slide, please. Okay, so just elaborating on that previous slide on the journey of migration. So different customers are actually in a different stage of their journey and maturity level. A lot of customers who start off in the legacy world, with monolith applications, with monolith application, legacy databases, legacy environments, and they sort of want to move forward. So, for them, sometimes it's not easy to just rewrite everything and just discard everything and move straight to refactoring the application and modernizing their workloads. There's probably a phased approach that needs to be taken, where they'll start to rehost or do a lift and shift of some of those workloads, and they may identify that some workloads do benefit from a rewrite or refactor. So they can take a hybrid approach, where they may refactor some workloads, and they may sort of just rehost some of those or do a lift and shift of some of those. So different customers are actually in a different phase of this journey. So those customers who want to go to rehost and replatform, such as move to traditional, what we call ECS, which is our compute instance in AWS, or move to container services in AWS, or EC2, which is our compute instance in the AWS. They might want to go a step further, and then this is where they start refactoring, making benefit of serverless computing, and benefiting from that DevOps model that we sort of spoke about, such as moving to Lambda, Aurora, DynamoDB, and various other things. Once they're actually into that sort of cloud native environment, they can then start innovating and sort of be more in a DevOps model, where they can do more frequent releases and meet up with market demands and be more competitive. Next slide, please. So I'd like to end with an example of the different pathways for migration and modernization before I hand over to my colleague Kishan. So let's suppose you've got a .NET MVC Windows application running on your data center, which is monolith in nature, and you want to move it across. So you may decide to chunk that application up. Some of those you may actually want to move to microservices. Like, for example, if you've got a retail application, you may want to move the payment system to microservices, because that's where you want more value add and you want that to be more sort of agile in nature. So that might be one of the pathways you take, refactor some of those workloads. You may want to move some of those workloads to containers and actually benefit from EKS and ECS, which is effectively our container offering for our traditional, either it's Kubernetes or our AWS offering, which is ECS for containers. You may want to move your managed databases to move more of your commercial grade databases to managed databases, so you don't have to worry about patching and security updates and backups and all that stuff, which is taken care of by managed databases. And you may want to move to more open source sort of systems, such as moving your Windows workloads to Linux and benefiting from that and not having to worry about licensing costs. So this is it from me. Obviously, if you have any questions, put it in the chat window and we'll address those at the end. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kishan, who's going to sort of follow up and talk about the different phases of migration.
Thanks very much, Junaid. So yeah, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking through one of the acceleration frameworks that we have. And I'm going to spend a little bit less time here because I know there's some questions in the chat, and it's really important we get to those and make time for them. So you'll see a lot of familiarities with this three-step approach that we have at AWS and the approach that the Codurance team took us through just slightly earlier in the presentation. And the reason we have this is because a blanket approach to adopting cloud just simply doesn't work. So this is because applications have different tech stacks. They will have their own individual problems and nuances. And essentially, they offer different things to the business, right? You have some really high revenue generating applications, and then you have some applications which are very small and just kind of keep the lights on. And so the treatment of those applications are going to be different. And whilst lift and shift is it's not a terrible strategy. It's very handy where it's where it's useful. It may not be the optimum strategy for all of your workloads. So we've heard how to identify where that modernization may be required, some of the trade-offs you get with one of the 7 R's that you pick. There's trade-offs with every strategy we choose. And then also some of the technology routes that Junaid just took us through on how you can modernize and some of the pathways you can use. But what does this life cycle actually look like? Well, this is it on the screen, and this is what we use to help our customers visualize the journey of getting from on-prem or a different cloud provider into AWS. And it's split into 3 phases. So the first is the assess. And this is where we kind of like taking stock and analyzing. And here I know in this conversation, we're focusing on that modernization piece. But can't forget that for a lot of customers out there, the AWS adoption does actually comprise of both a migration, so a traditional lift and shift, and probably some optimize, some of the stuff that Sam and Matt touched on earlier, and then also the modernization piece. But before we even get to that decision, we need to understand what's out there in our IT estate and what are the requirements for each of the applications, what is the business criticality, and then how do we assign it one of those 7 R's that Junaid took us through. And this is what that assess phase is all about. It's all about collecting that data really quickly to provide that high-level view of where we go next. And so we do things like rapid discovery. So we're using tooling to help gather information about our workloads. We're building a business case, something that Sam and Matt touched on earlier, on why it's so important to have that business case. We're also doing readiness assessments around how ready a customer is to migrate and modernize. We're doing briefings and workshops, so detailed workshops into some of the most critical applications. And also we can host things like immersion days. So if you as a customer are looking to adopt new technologies or just want to get a feel for how AWS works, we can come and sit down and talk through security and automation and some of the foundational services in AWS. That then gets us ready for the next stage, which is the mobilize. So this is the get ready phase. If you think about a race, on your marks, get set, go. This is that middle bit. This is where we've got all that data in, and we're really looking to kind of set the foundations, mobilize our platform, mobilize our people, etc., so we can have a successful foundation and successful adoption into AWS. And generally, we've split this into 4 phases. The first is the portfolio. So this is where we're going to deep dive into the applications. We're going to make sure that we have a robust strategy. We have a robust pattern that each application can follow. There's reusable assets. And we're going to keep aligning that to that business case. Are we focusing our efforts on where we want that business case to go? And we're making sure that we're putting our time, people, and resources into our most critical applications when we're talking about modernization. We've then got the people side. And this is incredibly important when adopting AWS, because there's a whole new way of working and a whole new way of operating when you're in the cloud versus when you're in on-prem. So we're trying to understand here, do the teams have the skills needed to run and operate in AWS? So things like patching, backups, monitoring, scaling, all those things are really different in AWS. So we want to make sure we're doing training and certification for your teams to make sure that they can run in AWS. And finally, I think it was Matt that touched on that cloud center of excellence, having that core group of people who's going to guide your organization, set those best practices, set the patterns up, set how we're going to do governance and all those types of things in the cloud. Next, we've got the platform. So this is deploying some of that fundamental architecture and infrastructure in terms of things like the landing zone. So this is like your baseline account structure in AWS, how you're going to do security logging and auditing and monitoring, and making sure all of that's set up and defining what operations looks like in AWS. And then also, touching on that security and compliance. It's, this is fundamental to operating in the cloud. I'm sure, many of you have industry regulations that you need to adhere to. So, how can we help you make that a reality and make sure you're operating within the boundaries and guidelines of the boards that you need to report into? And then finally, we have that migrate and modernize phase. And this is where we're building experience through hands-on doing. So let's pick some pilot applications. Let's run through some of those patterns. Let's understand what works really well, what didn't work so well, and how we can fix that, so that we have a really good runbook of activities to that we can fall back on, and processes that when we move this into large-scale migration and modernization, we have some of those best practices already written down, and we can follow them and make this a factory approach. So these 2 first phases, and even the third phase are not, they're very flexible. You can adapt them, and just because something's in the assess phase doesn't mean it always needs to stay there. Every customer is different. Work with AWS, work with the partner that you bring on board to make the process work for you. And then finally, we have migrate and modernize. And this is where you're doing that scale adoption. So for those lift and shift machines, you're going to lift and shift workloads. You're going to lift and shift them into AWS. You're going to do a lot of that optimization, so right-sizing the instances, bringing in automation where possible, bringing in some of that auto-scaling or automated security patching, and bringing in some of those best practices. And then also we're doing that modernize. So whether you're re-architecting and moving over to something on containers or serverless, you're doing this in a repeatable pattern to help keep that momentum going and make sure that you're leveraging a lot of the benefits that come out from both migrating and modernizing. So I hope that this, I've run through it very quickly. I hope that this has given you some sort of idea as to how you can structure your approach when adopting AWS. Rodrigo, if we could just very quickly move on to the next slide, and I think then we'll move on to the questions. The slides will be shared afterwards, after the actual presentation. So there are some links in there for you to go and explore yourselves. So no surprise, there's loads of tools out there to help you. When you see that previous slide, please don't think, there's so much to do, and how do we accelerate and leverage some of the stuff that's already out there? Well, great news, there's loads of tooling out there. Much of this is provided by AWS, so I won't go into some of the tooling at the minute, but we've got tools to help you do discovery. We've got tools to help you do TCO analysis. We've got tools to help you do lift and shift style migrations. And we've got tools to help you even implement things like a strangler fig pattern to help decompose and break down some of your monolith applications and run them side by side with augmented microservice components. But also, of course, there's a massive library of third-party tooling available out there. And we have third-party tooling that aligns to all 3 of those phases, so assess, mobilize, migrate, and modernize. And feel free to take a look at the AWS tooling. But also, if some of that third-party tooling works great for you, then go ahead down that route. Explore some of that. And of course, if you bring a partner on board, the partner may have their own tooling that they use. They may be even using other tooling out there because they've built automation and pipelines around that tooling. So understand how they're using that and embrace that as well. So Rodrigo, that's all from me. I just wanted to cover those two slides very quickly. I guess now it's a good time for us to jump into some of the questions that have been asked by the audience.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I think we have a few questions. The first one is about the cloud modernization framework. Question is the cloud modernization framework a software solution you provide or a procedure you use to build new solutions from the ground up? I think that's for probably the Codurance folks. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I don't mind taking that one. Cheers, Rodrigo. Yeah, good question. The cloud modernization framework is a framework that we use internally at Codurance to help identify where companies are on their cloud modernization journey. Each stage of that cloud modernization framework is backed by some internal tooling that Codurance have to help us, develop solutions in that space. But yeah, it's a way we try and express how we see cloud modernization and the need for it to customers. And it's backed by, as I say, backed by internal tooling. That makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Next one. Infrastructure cost savings, I understand. However, I'm not sure how developer savings can be achieved. Any takers?
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me? The developer cost savings in terms of yes, I understand what you're saying. This is a valid question. But if you consider some of your DevOps engineers to also be developers as well, who are actually writing code to actually keep your platforms up and running as well, then some of the services that are being offered by AWS, such as AWS Code Pipeline, and you can use infrastructure as a code, which is our CloudFormation templates, AWS Code Build, AWS Code Deploy, and some of these services that AWS natively provides you actually takes off a lot of that responsibility from you once you go into a more sort of DevOps model. Yes, in terms of building your applications and your microservices, to some extent, you can, if you wanted to benefit from serverless and build stuff in Lambda functions or benefit from AWS serverless computing, then some of those are very well integrated with each other. Like if you wanted to use that Lambda function to trigger or work with a DynamoDB database or Aurora DynamoDB database, then they're well connected, and some of that integration effort of actually developing actually goes away as well. So as a developer in the past, I understand your question, and it's a good question. But yeah, some of those DevOps activities and development that the DevOps guys actually do, tends to go away. And also it makes the engineer's task of actually developing easier by using some of the AWS managed services. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Probably I would like to extend that a bit more, not only from the cost saving perspective, but I think that for the whole developer experience as well. We usually work with the concept of service catalog. We try to understand the main needs of the software developers, and we try to automate the deployment of those environments. So a lot of developers sometimes need a test environment or even a development environment with certain characteristics. And then in order to reduce the costs and leverage the developer experience, by using those service catalogs, you can quickly, in one button, we can click and spin up a whole environment for you to try, and then destroy that, saving costs of not leaving that running 24/7, or even to spending time open a ticket for the platform team to enable that environment for you. Hope that adds something. Next question. Just to balance, what would you say is the downside of migrating to the cloud? I mean, with the complexity of migration suit a small organization? Any takers?
I think it depends a little bit on your business goals and your business drivers. That's what we tend to say as Codurance. What's the business reason for you to want to move to the cloud? Any change carries some degree of risk. So you want some payoff for moving to the cloud. I think both Kishan and Junaid and Sam talked through lots of the benefits that you can get through moving to AWS. I think it's just kind of understanding, is that payoff going to be enough for you versus the potential risk of change? Potentially, if your business, for example, is planning to go into new markets or to scale up, that's worth bearing in mind, because that's going to be a much more difficult thing to do if you're on premise compared to on AWS, where you can benefit from some of that auto scaling. So I think it's always worth framing it in terms of the business context and the business challenge you're looking to do, and having kind of understanding where technology fits into that. But of course, all change involves some degree of risk, so kind of aligning that with the business goals, I think is key.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important point. It's more about the relevance to the business rather than the size of the company. I think you need to consider that technologies as an enabler for your business, and then it needs to be aligned with what you want to do. Sometimes you need to consider things like latency and also the privacy of your data. There's a lot of complexities in terms of using the cloud or not, but they are all tied to the importance and relevance of those technologies to your business. So migration to the cloud is definitely you probably get more flexibility, as all the benefits that we showed, but you need to first understand your business requirements for that.
And you can also think about it as what can we hand off to a cloud provider like AWS that we don't want to be managing and running ourselves, because it doesn't directly add to the customer experience of our end customers, right? So your end customers probably are not too concerned about the type of technology you're running in your tech stack or the type of service you're running, as long as their service is good. So as much as you can provide over to AWS to patch and run and service, it gives you more time to focus to your customers. So I think completely right. It's not about the size; it's about what you are looking for as an outcome to your business.
Perfect. Agree. Next one. I noticed that AWS approach talks about IaaS, the infrastructure as service, virtual machines via lift and shift, and serverless, Lambda, DynamoDB, etc., as a cloud-native destination. However, the middle ground, containers like EKS, etc., are rarely mentioned. And are there any reasons for that?
I think that's probably just down to the way the slides are built. Genuinely, when I work with customers, containers is always on the table. It's a fantastic way of getting that middle ground. Not every workload is suited to serverless. They suit very different types of applications. But I would not say that it's probably rarely mentioned just as a coincidence. I talk about containers, ECS, EKS all the time with my customers.
Just to add to that as well, I think I agree that I wouldn't see it as a intermediary step. I think I'd see it as an alternative, right? I think, as Kishan was saying there, not all workloads are going to be suited to serverless compute, particularly if they're quite long running, for example. So I wouldn't see it as a kind of a journey you have to go through. You have to go through containers to get towards Lambda. You might find that certain parts of the architecture fit well in containers. Some of them are better fit on Lambda.
Yeah, and for example, if you had a Spring Boot microservice, and the natural path for you might be to, put it to the cloud, but you wouldn't want to rewrite it in Lambda or something like that. You would want to probably put it in containers and actually benefit from that. So as an engineer, it's probably the more natural path for you to modernize, as opposed to going to serverless as well. So as Kishan mentioned, it's just a coincidence. It's not on the slides, but we do sort of encourage people who want to go down the container route to use ECS or EKS that we actually offer.
Perfect. Next question. More specifically, cloud native and microservices are mentioned in the serverless context, but not in the Kubernetes context. Is this a different emphasis to other providers? I believe you quite answered the questions with the previous comments, right?
Yeah, I think it's a similar question to the previous one.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. DevOps is more than moving to the cloud. Does AWS have any tools to help move to the organization as a whole move, consultancy, etc.?
Yeah, so I could take this one. So, I mean, there's several ways AWS can help you become more sort of DevOps oriented. I mean, one which I mentioned earlier is infrastructure as a cloud. We have AWS CloudFormation or the Cloud Development Kit, which basically defines your infrastructure and applications as code, a bit like Terraform or if you stuff like that you're used to. So you can define your workloads and everything, or have CloudFormation scripts to define your infrastructure. That's one way. The other things we have different tools that sort of encourage continuous integration and continuous delivery, such as AWS Code Pipeline, AWS Code Build, and AWS Code Deploy. So they sort of help to build your sort of continuous integration, continuous delivery sort of pipeline, and various other things. We have what we call the AWS Systems Manager, which sort of can streamline your operations in terms of patching your compute instances and various other things, remotely or automatically, and actually lending to that sort of DevOps principle. And and there's many other services as well that actually help you down that path. So yeah, you're right. By moving to AWS, you don't just become DevOps, sort of working in that DevOps operating model, but you've got the tools there to sort of ease that transition into that sort of DevOps model if you follow best practices and the best practices for modernization. And the other thing is containerization, as previously mentioned.
Let's add to that very briefly as well. I think all good points, definitely. I think the thing that people often forget is that, particularly in that kind of modernized phase where you're changing your architecture, you're also changing the human side of it as well quite often. So there'll be a team aspect around some of those things. You're maybe moving people around. Perhaps some jobs might evolve and some skills that might need to be kind of evolve and bring into the organization as well. So all these things, I think, come into not just the DevOps mentality, but your kind of wider cloud operating model as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's this last slide that we have as well from Kishan also helps to see that it's not only the DevOps side. I think there's a lot of other tools that can help us. I particularly like the migration evaluator. Is a great tool for discovery. For example, sometimes you're a bit lost on the type of components that you want to migrate to the cloud, how to do that, how to set the boundaries between your workloads, dependencies, and things like that. So the migration evaluator is a good one for discovery and also to give like an idea of the costs as well, and I've heard that some latest version even can give you some idea about sustainability, how to get the most of the new technologies AWS. And also I think in terms of we've been using the well-architected framework as well as a good tool for us to understand the gaps we have in our on-premises infrastructure, not only in the cloud. So that's a great thing about the well-architected framework. You don't need to be on AWS to use that. So actually, AWS suggests that we use that before we move to the cloud. We start to do an assessment on our current state on premises, and then as we migrate, we try already to implement some of those remediations that are highlighted by the tool. So yeah, some great tools to not only from DevOps side, but migration as well.
I think We are at time, Rodrigo, unfortunately. So
Brilliant. There's one last question, though.
I guess you can squeeze it in if people have got time, but we just need to be mindful of people's time and respect that. So let's answer that one quickly.
Last one then. Do you have any numbers, example of case studies? Links would be great. Appreciate this, of course, depends on the size of the organization, number of services, and complexity, but guess-wise.
This one really, it really depends. We've seen customers move out of data centers really quickly when they need to, and then also when customers don't have a clear business drivers and clear needs to do anything, it drags out for a long time. So this is where you need to have that. This is where partners come in fantastically, because they bring in that structure and rigor and momentum to your organization to say, here's the timelines, here's how we're going to deliver, and make sure you hit those numbers. But it's really difficult to provide a number. I think, there's an answer already saying collating some studies between the Codurance and AWS and sending them out. But it's really hard to say, given no context.
I think it depends as well on the shape of the migration as well, right? If it's a pure lift and shift, well, I guess sort of going back to the 7 R's that I think Junaid talked through, what flavour of your migration do you want to go for, and kind of what the scope will be. So I think we probably between us maybe kind of share some links afterwards.
I was going to say there's some brilliant examples and case studies on both AWS's website and Codurance's website. So let's share some content afterwards. So I think that's everything, Rodrigo.
Yeah, that's all.
Brilliant. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining. Again, apologies for going slightly over. We do respect that you're busy people. So thanks to Matt, Kishan, Rodrigo, Junaid, and Sam for your time today. We're going to be sharing the recording and the slides and some resources, and also there'll be a feedback form emailed to you. So if you have any further questions, then feel free to email hello@codurance.com. Codurance and AWS are very close partners. We work on many opportunities together to support customers as they migrate and modernize to the cloud. So if you'd like to talk to us about how we can support you, then we'd love to help. Thank you again so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.